History leaves evidence, but sometimes the evidence doesn't make it into the textbooks. They said civilization began along the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Nile, but they rarely tell you what the Nile remembered before Egypt even had a name. My name is Amari Truth, the history detective. Tonight, we open the history archives, the African civilizations they don't teach you about. From stone cities hidden beneath the Zimbabwe plains, to libraries buried in the sands of Timbuktu, Africa's story was never lost. It was concealed. And every concealment leaves fingerprints. Let's follow the evidence. Every case begins with a crime scene. And in this one, the fingerprints are everywhere. Erased names, missing maps, and histories rewritten in ink that favored empire. When European scholars drew the first maps of civilization, Africa was carved out of its own story. The kingdom of Kush, the cities of Nok, Axum, and Benin, all relabeled, misdated, or declared myths. But the evidence never vanished. Dr. John Henrik Clarke warned us, to control a people, you must first control what they think about themselves and how they regard their history. Cheikh Anta Diop proved through language and science that Egypt's earliest dynasties were African in origin, their art, skin tones, and spiritual systems rooted in the continent they later called dark. Marimba Ani called this a war of cultural genocide, a psychological operation that taught generations to look east for light and west for salvation, but never home. Runoko Rashidi spent decades traveling through museums and temples, photographing our faces in stone where others saw nothing. Ivan van Sertima showed how African navigators reached the Americas long before Columbus claimed to discover it. The crime isn't that Africa lacked civilization, it's that civilization was stolen from Africa's name and sold back as someone else's triumph. But every lie leaves residue. And in the ruins of Kush, the walls still whisper the truth. When you follow the trail far enough, you reach the evidence, the kind that speaks in stone, science, and language. Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop spent a lifetime proving through carbon dating, melanin tests, and linguistic analysis that the founders of Egyptian civilization were unmistakably African. His colleague, Theophile Obenga, confirmed that ancient Egyptian shared roots with Wolof, a living language of West Africa. The words of kings became the words of the people. Ivan van Sertima presented metallurgical evidence that West African seafarers reached the Americas centuries before Columbus, bringing seeds, symbols, and technology. His findings weren't dismissed because they lacked proof. They were ignored because they challenged power. Runoko Rashidi traveled to Asia, Europe, and the Pacific, documenting the same African presence, statues, paintings, genetic traces, all echoing one truth. Africa's children have walked the earth since the beginning. Basil Davidson, a European historian, admitted what many in his field denied. It was not the absence of history that distinguished Africa, but the loss of it through conquest and racism. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing added that the psychological dimension of this erasure created an entire system, one where black brilliance had to be hidden to justify white supremacy. And Dr. Joy DeGruy showed how centuries of trauma, from slavery to segregation, still echo in the black psyche. Evidence not only of survival, but of resilience coded in our very being. Then there are the physical witnesses. The astronomical precision of Nabta Playa, older than Stonehenge. The geometric engineering of Great Zimbabwe, unmatched in its era. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, tens of thousands of scientific, medical, and philosophical texts predating European universities. Each artifact, each scholar, each voice adds a fingerprint to the truth. Africa was not in darkness. The world dimmed its light, and if the light was dimmed, it can be restored. Every case has a motive, and in this one, the motive has always been the same: control. Dr. Amos Wilson said it with the clarity of a man who had studied the pattern his entire life. The destruction of a people's history is the destruction of their power to act independently. Erase the memory and you weaken the mind. The myth of African inferiority didn't grow from ignorance. It was engineered, a deliberate design of empire. Dr. Wade Nobles called it spiritual misorientation, the moment a people begin to see themselves through the eyes of those who conquer them. When the map is redrawn, when monuments are renamed, when knowledge is quietly patented and relocated, the message becomes unmistakable. Civilization has one birthplace, and it isn't you. But history is stubborn. Even when buried, it leaves a trail. And when you follow that trail far enough, you arrive right here, in the present. Dr. Claude Anderson connected the theft of Africa's history to the economics of today. Centuries of unpaid labor, stolen land, and deliberate policy shaping what we now call inequality. Not an accident, a blueprint. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing showed us how color itself became a weapon, how pigmentation was turned into a psychological tool to maintain dominance. And Dr. Joy DeGruy revealed that trauma doesn't evaporate with a signature on a document. It lingers, it adapts, it threads itself into families and behavior. Proof that the crime scene is still active. The evidence brings us to one undeniable truth. We were never primitive. We were programmed to believe we were. But even inside that machinery of oppression, the spirit refused to die. Each spiritual awakening, every musical revolution, every intellectual uprising, from Harlem's jazz halls to Accra's parliament, was an act of remembering. Dr. Molefi Kete Asante calls that Afrocentricity, the return to one's center. Liberation not through weapons, but through worldview. And Dr. John Henrik Clarke reminded us before he left this earth. Powerful people cannot afford to educate the people they oppress. He wasn't warning us. He was handing us the motive. Every investigation, no matter how far it reaches, eventually leads you back to where it started. The self. Because the real crime scene wasn't only in the ruins or the archives or the scattered pieces of our history. It was in the way we were taught to see. Dr. Amos Wilson said it with precision. If you don't understand the nature of power, then everything else you think you understand will deceive you. And he was right. Power isn't just armies or money or politics. Power is memory. Whoever controls memory controls meaning, and whoever controls meaning controls minds. For generations, the African mind was quietly put on trial, accused of barbarism, stripped of its evidence, and sentenced to forget. But that sentence was never permanent, because every drumbeat, every whispered prayer, every rhythm that grew into blues, jazz, gospel, soul, and hip-hop was a testimony, a coded message, a reminder that our ancestors left a trail of remembrance disguised as culture. Dr. Wade Nobles calls it the reclamation of spirit, the journey back to that inner place that knows we were divine long before we were defined. So the work in front of us isn't just about restoring history, it's about restoring vision, seeing ourselves not as survivors of tragedy, but as descendants of genius, builders, thinkers, creators of worlds. That's why we search. That's why we investigate. That's why we keep the eye open. History isn't the past, it's the pattern. And once we recognize that pattern, we gain the power to rewrite the future. Stay aware, stay grounded, keep your third eye open. I'm out.